Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to Season 3 of the Logical Christian Podcast. I'm your Logical Christian, Dan Irwin. The Logical Christian Podcast is not here to tell you what to think. It's an exercise in how to think. Rather than just accept what we're being told with regard to current events, politics, science, religion, and everything else, we're going to stop the spin, ask questions, dive deep, and look at the world logically. And since logic is a gift from God, most importantly, we're going to look at it all as Christians. Links can be found in the show notes if you'd like to follow along. So with that, let's go be logical Christians. It's amazing to think that humans have been around for a bazillion years now? But right now, at this very point in history, everything is apparently going wrong. We're on the edge of total destruction, mostly of our own doing, and no matter what we do, we can't seem to fix it. Or more likely, we actually make it worse. Well, on today's episode, first we're going to spend all the money and then check the receipt and look around us to try to find what we paid for, and then we're going to just fade into obscurity, maybe. Or maybe not, who's to say? And finally, do I read to live or do I live to read? I have no idea, but we'll talk about what I've read, and I'm alive right now, allegedly, so draw your own conclusion. So, go grab your checkbook. Start writing zeros and commas, I'll tell you when to stop, and then check the mirror. Make sure you're still there, because you never know until you do. And with that, here we go! Quote, "The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government, and I'm here to help." This is a quote made famous by President Ronald Reagan on August 12, 1986, during a news conference. For probably 99% of Americans, as well as citizens of other countries, this is likely one of the most widely agreed upon sentiments possibly ever, with a varying degree of agreement based on who's in control at the time. If your party is in charge and, doing things, it doesn't really even matter what they're doing for most people. Your party and things, that's good enough. Of course, if you're on the other end of the political spectrum, then absolutely every single thing the controlling fascistic party does is more evil than the last, and they all need to burn in the deepest level of Dante's Inferno. In the middle, at least in the United States, of our self-imposed two-party system, you have the independents. They could shift either way depending on the issue. You've also got fringe groups like the Green Party that want nothing more than for mankind to cease to exist. And you've also got your libertarians who absolutely hate government, generally speaking, want maximum freedom, minimum authority, and tout the party line, quote, diligently plotting to take over the world and leave you alone. Got to admit that sounds nice. Pretty close to anarchy, though, so, you need to be prepared for that. The anarchy. But every once in a while, we find an issue that unifies everyone. And just a few weeks ago, we may have brought up one of these unifiers again. Found on the Associated Press via MSN.com, headline, Emhoff announces $1.7 billion in pledges to help President Biden meet goal of ending hunger by 2030. Well, I, for one, think it's about time. I'm hungry, all the time, and I do my best to end it. That's quite obvious. But that's not exactly what the second gentleman means. So Doug Emhoff, the husband of Kamala Harris, and I'll just say the fact that she didn't take his last name really tells a person something. And before the strong, independent, liberated women get all upset with me saying that they don't need any man's last name, keep in mind that the last name you're empowered to keep was most likely your daddy's. Anyway, Doug apparently needing some street cred as they are increasingly trying to see if Kamala could take the reins from President Potato. Spoiler alert, she can't and couldn't. She doesn't have that skill set. And yes, I'm trying to be nice. Well, he announced a large partnership with the Harlem Globetrotters and kaboom! That's an exclamation point at the end there, which is a self-described national nonprofit that works to end play space inequity for good. Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina, 16 mayors from across the United States, and others, totaling 140 pledges by various health systems, insurance companies, nonprofits, philanthropic organizations, local governments, etc., in a collaboration with the White House in order to end hunger and build healthy communities. So apparently in September 2022 at the White House Conference on Hunger, Nutrition, and Health, President Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. announced that he, which roughly translates to he, quote, set a goal to end hunger and reduce diet-related diseases by 2030 while reducing health disparities. And I'm sorry, I just can't go any farther without making some reference to the fact that Biden is collaborating with Kaboom. I mean, there are both nuclear and gastrointestinal jokes that can be made here. I mean, how could I possibly pass up at least one of those options? Dr. Jill, clean up on aisle Joe, I made a Kaboom. Also, all we ever do is see this guy eat ice cream. How can he talk about nutrition? But since I'm trekking down this rabbit trail of digression, I learned just the other day that apparently ice cream actually helps with mood and engagement for those suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's. Isn't that interesting? He sure does eat a lot of ice cream, doesn't he? Anyway, at this conference, Biden announced $8 billion of commitments, so that will be combined with the other $1.7 billion. Now, Chef Jose Andres, who stood with Emhoff during his announcement, stated, quote, I cannot believe we have to have the challenge to end hunger in America. And I totally agree, but I'll get to that. So the AP says that, quote, about 12.8% of U.S. households, or about 17 million people, did not have enough money or other resources to get sufficient food in 2022, according to the Economic Research Service at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. That was up from 10.2% in 2021. Interestingly, if you go to the USDA website and look at the data for food insecurity, some interesting trends pop out. Their data, at least in the chart they present, goes back to 2001. From 2001 to 2009, George W. Bush, a Republican, was president, and the average insecurity rate was 11.1%, which was pretty much constant except for 2008 when it jumped up to 14.6%, which, if you recall, was the Great Recession, based on terrible practices enabled and or mandated by the government. From 2009 to 2017, Barack Obama, a Democrat, or really, if we're being honest here, a socialist, was president. He averaged 14% food insecurity, with all but his last 2 years being at 14% or greater. The last 2 years finally dropped to 12.7% and 12.3%. And if you recall, one of his biggest initiatives was to get as many people on food stamps, government assistance as possible, whether you needed it or not, because that's what socialists do. And if you further recall, economists were losing their mind with Obama because he was literally doing all of the wrong things to get the economy running again. He was complacent about unemployment, underemployment, and engagement rates. He was more focused on taxing and demonizing the so-called rich than he was on utilizing capitalism to do what it's designed to do. Then we get to Trump, 2017 to 2021, a Republican who built on the momentum that started in the last couple years of Obama's term, I think despite Obama, not because of, and Trump averaged 11% food insecurity, ending with 2 years of 10.5%. That's through the height of COVID. Then Biden came in. It dipped slightly to 10.2% in 2021, then jumped back up to 12.8% in 2022. This is not due to COVID, and I have no doubt that 2023 will come in even worse because have you paid attention to the cost of groceries with the massive inflation? Yeah, you bet you have. And don't you have to start asking yourself, is this food insecurity thing yet another manufactured crisis, like so-called racism and various claimed phobias, to be used as a politically expedient talking point for votes? In 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson, in his first State of the Union address, declared, quote, an unconditional war on poverty. It's about time. As part of this, Johnson built expansive social welfare initiatives with his Great Society program, adding on to those done by Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson and primarily Franklin Roosevelt with his New Deal. At the time of his declaration, nearly 20% of Americans were considered to be poor. Now, in 2014, the Heritage Foundation did a study on the war on poverty over the 50 years since it was declared. As stated, when Johnson made his declaration, the rate was very close to 20%. After about 4 or 5 years, the rate dropped by about 7% to about 12.5% or so. But what most won't tell you is that the poverty rate was in a nosedive from about 1949, where it peaked at just under 35%. Well, after it hit 12.5%, for 50 years, the war on poverty has seen the poverty rate drift between about 11% and 15%. For 50 years. So where do we screw up? Why didn't we do anything? See, and that's the rub. In those 50 years, the government has constantly pumped taxpayer dollars into this war to the tune of $22 trillion in 2012 dollars. We spent $22 trillion in 50 years, and now 10 years later, we've probably added another, 4 or 5 trillion to that? And where do we stand today? Well, in 2020 and 2021, about 11.6%. So, are we just that inept? Or do we not want to actually fix the problem? Or is there no fix for the problem? I'd argue that all three are probably true. I don't believe that this can be fixed, not entirely. And to be honest, it appears that we found the floor, about 11%. Now, maybe we could drive it a percent or two lower, but we have literally found the floor, that the bottom rate, we can't go lower than that. That's what I believe. Now, I do also believe that the government organizations handling taxpayer dollars are this incompetent. There's no question in my mind there. And frankly, that's both Democrats and Republicans, and they can get a lot of mileage out of using poverty and food insecurity. It's one of those things that, we can just keep pouring money into and not affect it. And so we can always complain that it's the other guy's fault and that we alone can fix it. It's a politically expedient issue, and that makes it very useful. Now, this story also makes me ask another grouping of questions around the main question of how much? The first how much question is, how much would it cost us to solve hunger? So an article on Time.com from November 2023 says that in the United States, there are 44 million people, which includes children and seniors, who, quote, grapple daily with food insecurity. Now, they further claim that globally, over the last 7 years, the numbers have gone from 80 million to 350 million people. I'll be honest, I don't think they're using the same criteria for that first United States number in the globe. I don't know. I kind of find it hard to believe those numbers a little bit. I think I'm wrong, though, but they just seem off. Anyway, no matter. Time wouldn't lie to us. We know that for sure. Now, they make the claim that conflicts, the pandemic, and your favorite global killer and mine, climate change, are responsible. Now, skipping nearly all of the article because I don't care, we find that they cite the Food and Agriculture Organization as saying annually it would take $265 billion, quote, for sustainable hunger eradication. Now, if we move to WFPUSA.org, that's the UN World Food Program, in an article from the end of 2022, they said that, quote, extreme weather, conflict, rising food costs, the socioeconomic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, and now the war in Ukraine has caused the number of extremely hungry people across the globe to more than double over the last few years. Apparently, the UN set a mandate of zero hunger by 2030 back in 2012. It sounds similar to everything else the UN touches. It just kind of gets markedly worse at a remarkable pace. Now, they have two markers of hunger set by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. The first is defined as, quote, an uncomfortable or painful physical sensation caused by insufficient consumption of dietary energy. And then they clarify, quote, in other words, your stomach growls. They say about 828 million people across the globe fit that definition, and I'll be honest, it's been a few hours since I ate dinner, and I fit that definition. Now, this article then goes a second step and says that 345 million people out of the 828 million are experiencing severe levels of hunger, including starvation. So, okay, maybe around that 350 million people mark globally. Maybe that's an accurate number. So they tell us what they think it would cost to end world hunger. They said that in 2021, they fed 100 million people on 9.6 billion, but they had a shortfall of 5.2 billion. In 2021, they estimated that it would take about 40 billion annually to end world hunger by 2030. As a comparison, they stated that Americans spent $11 billion on Cyber Monday in 2021, so we should just be able to donate to the UN World Food Program. Which, let me be clear, I'm a big believer in donating to charities. Just know who you're giving to and what they stand for, and how well they manage your donations, etc., etc. Don't just give to anybody. So anyway, the UN says that they could end world hunger for $40 billion a year, and the Food and Agriculture Organization says it would take $265 billion a year. They should ask the UN what they're doing, because they seem to have a much more efficient system somehow. Looking at one more, globalgiving.org from early 2021 says that estimates to end world hunger range from $7 billion a year to $265 billion a year, and I say go with the 7. Now, they blame bad weather, disease, outbreaks, pests, war, falling crop prices, rising food prices, and low or no wages for causing the hunger problem. Now, apparently they use a much looser definition of hungry, as they say that more than 2 billion people, quote, do not have regular access to safe, nutritious, and sufficient food. Then they say that 820 million globally suffer from chronic hunger, so that number kind of lines up with the big number from the UN. Now, they cite Hunger-Free America at a cost of $25 billion per year to end hunger in the United States, but we would only account for about 30 million out of the 2 billion people. If we only counted the 820 million people, multiplying out the cost, that would equate to about $685 billion per year globally. That's a good deal higher of an estimate than what we've seen in any of the others. Now, just for fun, I want to point out something. This would be the second how much question I have. How much have we spent annually on our war on poverty? And the answer is, remember, $22 trillion in 2012 dollars, right? The answer is, drum roll, please, right, drum, $440 billion per year in 2012 dollars. That's as of 2014. Now, let's say that we use the high estimate of $265 billion per year to end world hunger. That includes the United States. Gotta ask, what exactly are we doing? We should have solved this problem many, many years ago. We could look at this in a different way. In the continental United States, the cutoff for poverty is an annual income of $15,060 for a single person, and then you add $5,380 for each additional person. So a family of 4 that makes $31,200 or less per year is considered to be living in poverty. And to be honest, wow, would I agree. Knowing that you wouldn't have to pay any income taxes at that level, that equates to about $15 per hour, 40 hours per week. So if we go with the number I cited a moment ago of about 30 million people in the United States, we just divvy that 440 billion out evenly, that would give each one of those people, man, woman, child, $14,666.67 per year. For a family of 4, that would give them nearly $60,000 more per year on top of what they were currently making or not making, and bump them into lower or even mid-level middle class. Again, this war on poverty. What exactly are we doing with this money? Now, don't get me wrong. I am not advocating that we just hand out money like that. It's just a way to illustrate how much of a waste it is to have government create or manage literally anything. How could you spend $440 billion per year to fight poverty and literally not make a dent on poverty? Now, I've also got to ask this question. Why are we asking private citizens and private corporations and private organizations to fight this fight? If the government steals our money every year under the guise of taxes, and they've made a vow to fight poverty and hunger, and they literally waste nearly $500 billion per year and make no progress, then ask us to contribute more. I mean, that's fine, but make a massive percentage cut in my taxes. Give the money back to me so that I can donate where I feel it makes the best sense, with organizations that actually do something with the money. Okay, one more how much question for you before we dock this yacht. How much is the United States government wasting on garbage that could be used to fight hunger and poverty? This is, of course, just ignoring the $440 billion per year already that we're wasting. Okay, well, as luck would have it, Kentucky Senator Dr. Rand Paul puts out his Festivus report right around Christmas every year. This is his annual report on government waste. He, or most likely his staff, scours the massive number of bills that get voted into law, looking for earmarks and graft and grift and whatever other things, pet projects and sheer stupidity. This doesn't capture everything, unfortunately, but for 2023, his report contained waste totaling $900 billion, double the amount wasted on the war on poverty on average that's doing nothing. Now, you can file through his 25-page report if you'd like, but some of the items you'll find are COVID paycheck protection funds being distributed to people who submitted pictures of faces of dolls, claiming it was a real person, and the government's like, yeah, okay, good enough, and then they pay out. You'll find destroyed military equipment because they didn't cover it or bring it in from the rain. For years, brand new high-dollar equipment ruined. You'll find a study to see what happens to monkeys when they're given meth. You'll also find a study on transgender monkeys. That's a Dr. Fauci study, apparently. And a study on gambling monkeys. They like monkeys. You'll find $38 million paid to dead people, as well as a pot of $400 million just for political campaign stuff, and $236 billion in improper federal payments. Those are just kind of oopsie payments, the wrong amount or maybe given to the wrong person, something like that. Our government spent $6 million on boosting Egyptian tourism, and some portion of a $2.7 million grant went to study Russian cats on treadmills. Again, I gotta ask, why haven't we solved hunger and poverty across the globe by now? And how do we keep electing people who are so mentally deranged that they think spending our tax dollars, and to be honest, our probably great-great-grandchildren's tax dollars at this point, is a good use of our money on this garbage? How is this being a responsible steward? Now, again, don't get me wrong. I'm not advocating not paying taxes. I don't want to pay them. I think most of the tax dollars collected is literal theft, and at least a portion is used for unadulterated evil, but render unto Caesar, right? I'm also not advocating that we don't fight against poverty and hunger. I get that. We should. Of course, the fact that we're $34 trillion in debt right now, literally adding another $1 trillion to that debt about every 100 days because we're spending more than we're taking in, even with all of these taxes, well, that should send up a red flag or two about the fact that at some point soon, we won't be able to fight anything. Hunger, poverty, unemployment, the myth of climate change, drugs, wars, nothing. But let's pretend that that's not the case. I don't have a problem if a nation is prosperous with them being charitable. That's what we should do as individuals. Why not the government? Of course, we have to ignore the fact that the government doesn't actually make any money. It just, takes money and redistributes it. But you get the gist of my statement. The problem I have is the fact that we've spent way more than enough to end world hunger every year. Why haven't we done it? Or we could end poverty and hunger in the United States for what we're spending on this war on poverty, making absolutely no progress whatsoever. Or we could eliminate the stupid and wasteful spending, figure out where we're flushing all of this poverty war money down the toity, stop doing that, end hunger in the United States and poverty in the United States, contribute an amount to end world hunger. We can give some out there with the expectation that other countries will also contribute. And we could cut taxes. But that's not really what governments do, is it? And this is why I ask the question, what are we doing here? Are we actually interested in solving hunger and ending poverty? Yeah, we sure are, in the same way that the pharmaceutical manufacturers want to cure disease. Now, I've said in a recent podcast that my job is to eliminate my job. If I could do my job perfectly, it would mean I would have to be able to anticipate all possible human error as well as design flaws and material flaws. I'd have to eliminate wear, etc., etc. Then I wouldn't have a job anymore. But it's not possible. I'm not worried about, having to look for a job anytime soon. Well, I'm still grossly incompetent, so there is that, but that's a completely different issue. Big Pharma will never be able to cure disease. Big government will never be able to end hunger or poverty. But unlike me, who is actually trying to make improvements, making it harder to do my job as I have to keep searching for fruit higher and higher in the tree in order to pick it, government, just like pharma, is in the business of managing their respective issues, not fixing them. Pharma wants to manage your disease in order to keep you beholden to the same or more meds. Meds they're more than happy to provide for you for a price. And don't get me wrong, I do believe there's a place for medication. It's just not every place for everything. And should every medication come with dozens of side effects that require, you guessed it, more medication to counteract that? The government wants to manage poverty and manage hunger, and they've got all sorts of programs in order to help you. And if you want that assistance, well, you better vote for the right person because the other guy hates you and doesn't want to help you. And both of the candidates spend a lot of time and money in crafting the narrative to make you believe that they're with you. They're sympathizing with you. They're in the ring with you, fighting for you. And just stick with them. You and them as a team. You'll get this figured out eventually. I'm from the government. I'm here to help. And once you realize that these faceless organizations are working for you, or for your repeat business at least, then you have to ask the question, what's wrong with the humans that are in control of these things? Why would they do this? Why are they just managing rather than legitimately trying to fix problems? This is taxes on cigarettes, right? I mean, sure, ciggies are bad for you, but how much tax can they put on there before they start to lose revenue from people quitting? They don't want to lose the money, just give the appearance they're trying to help you while stealing more from you. This is the legalization of gambling, knowing that it destroys the lives of those getting too deeply into it. This is the legalization of marijuana, knowing it's a gateway drug. They absolutely know this, but also knowing that tax money is just hanging out there for them. And the list goes on. Just manage the issues. Don't fix them. Don't try to help people. In fact, the people, humanity, are really the last things on their mind. So why are they doing this? Why are humans doing this to fellow humans? Image bearers against image bearers? Well, I mean, pick your sin, right? We're in a fallen world after all. Greed, power, control, lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, the boastful pride of life. It's that sort of thing. So the government has put all these social programs in place, all these initiatives out there, spending massive levels of money they've taken from the people, the businesses, the job creators, with the stated goal of helping people. But all they're really doing is throwing money at pet projects while enslaving the population to the free money and free stuff. It used to be that family was expected to pick each other up. Then if that wasn't able to happen for whatever reason, the church stepped in to help these people. And both of those wanted to get people back on their feet as quickly as possible and get them self-sufficient again, if it was possible. But the government took that responsibility from us, and we gladly handed it over. And now that's the argument that the left likes to make whenever they can. Oh, those other guys want to take your, and then fill in the blank, away. They want to take it away. You better vote for me. But really, we're commanded to do more than just stand by and watch as the government fulfills our role. Admittedly, the problem is that it's hard for probably the majority of the population to pay taxes and pay bills. For some, they have to stop there. Others, they can give some sort of offering to the church. And then you throw and give money to charities or to family or friends. Most of us don't have a well that deep to draw from. And that's where government needs to stop with the garbage and dramatically lower taxes. Fire mass quantities of people who are involved with all of this waste and corruption and focus on their primary responsibilities, which is, really is kind of defense and roads. Really is about all I'd give them. And to be honest, if the states had more money to work with rather than the federal government taxing it all, the states could probably take care of the roads part. So, as Moses was walking through the last 40 days of his life, that's what the book of Deuteronomy entails, only about 40 days, he was recounting all that happened since Egypt. He was restating the law. He was relaying the final messages that God was giving him. In a section of Deuteronomy 15, we really kind of get our marching orders concerning the poor. And yes, I realize that this was directed toward the children of Israel, the Jewish population at that time, but the implication is much larger now, in fact. So chapter 15, verses 7 through 11 state, quote, "If there is a needy one among you, one of your brothers, in any of your gates of the towns in your land which Yahweh your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart nor close your hand from your needy brother, but you shall freely open your hand to him and shall generously lend him sufficient for his need in whatever he lacks. Beware lest there be a vile thought in your heart saying, the 7th year, the year of the remission of debts is near, and your eye is hostile toward your needy brother, and you give him nothing. Then he may cry to Yahweh against you, and it will be a sin in you. You shall generously give to him, and your heart shall not be grieved when you give to him, because for this thing Yahweh your God will bless you in all your work, and in all that you send forth your hand to do. For the needy will never cease to be in the land. Therefore I am commanding you, saying, you shall freely open your hand to your brother, to your afflicted and needy in your land. So, if a brother of yours, and this isn't referring to another son of your parents, this is referring to the Israelites as a whole. If a fellow Israelite is in a position of need, you are not to weigh your options and calculate the cost and stingily hold back assistance. You're to help that brother. This doesn't mean that you support him in his laziness or something, right? Proverbs is clear. If you don't work, you don't eat. But there are times in the majority of lives where some help is needed. If we can help, we're supposed to help. Yahweh, through Moses, also made it clear that there will always be needy in the land. And Jesus restated the same fact in Matthew 26, that we will always have the poor among us. But lest you think that God's command to help your brother is only for the Jews, keep in mind that all Christians are now grafted in. Remember Romans 9:6-8, quote, for they are not all Israel who are descended from Israel, nor are they all children because they are Abraham's seed. But through Isaac your seed will be named. That is, the children of the flesh are not the children of God, but the children of the promise are considered as seed. So now we're talking about the entire Christian population, which is backed up in Matthew 25 when Jesus speaks of the final judgment. Quote, then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom which has been prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. And then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? And when did we see you as a stranger and invite you in, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? And the king will answer and say to them, truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it to one of these brothers of mine, even the least of them, you did it to me. Now the key word here is brothers. This is signifying fellow Christians. We are called to care for our brothers and sisters in Christ, just as the Jews were called to care for their brothers and sisters as children of Israel. And remember, just a few months, maybe 6 months prior to that passage, as found in Luke, a scholar of the law, that's the Mosaic or Levitical law, asked Jesus to, try once again to entrap him. How could he inherit eternal life? And after having the question turned back on him, the scholar rightly answered, to love God with all he is and to love his neighbor as himself. Those are the two greatest commandments, the entire law summed up in 2 commands. The scholar further inquired as to who exactly is his neighbor. And this is where we get the story of the Good Samaritan, the neighbor not being one of the beaten and robbed, left for dead fellow Jews, but the Samaritan, a Jewish half-breed and a sworn enemy. That was the man who was the true neighbor of the severely injured Jewish man. So our neighbor is literally humanity. So when you piece all this together, the poor will always be there, and as Christians, our job is to help our neighbor, our family first, our brothers and sisters in Christ second, and the rest of humanity third. That's the correct biblical order. And we do this according to our ability, which is why there's a biblical order to follow. Unfortunately, our government and many governments of the industrialized world have taken over our job, as I just said, and the odds of us wresting control back is slim to none, to be honest. I don't know how we fix the system that's in place. The answer is really the answer for every issue in this country, in this world, a revival, a return to Christ as a nation. That said, assuming that doesn't happen, when the federal credit card runs out, it'll probably fix itself. But it'll be a very, very hard and devastating landing for millions of people. And has always been done, the church and the Christians will do whatever they can to help. But it'll be hard because we're not used to it anymore. A lot of government programs have been put in place since, say, the Great Depression, and we're not really ready anymore for a time when the government isn't able to carry the bulk of the load. Regardless, as Christians, whether the hard times come or not, we need to live in reality. We need to know our responsibility, and we need to know the words of Jesus. And knowing all of that, we need to even make a plan as to what we can do and be prepared to do it. And unlike the government, we need to be serious about doing our job, to actually help others rather than manage them, to treat them as people, not votes or pawns, and to work ourselves out of a job rather than just go through the motions using the suffering of others to our advantage. Remember in the movie Back to the Future when Marty, played by Michael J. Fox, was on stage back in the 1950s playing guitar for the song Earth Angel, and he starts fading away because his future parents, who were at that high school dance, hadn't kissed yet? Yeah, who knew that was actually a real thing? I mean, not so much the literal slowly fading away, becoming transparent, getting weak, falling over on the amp, not able to play, with apparently nobody either noticing or caring that you appear to be dying of a cardiac infarction right there on stage. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about man, like as a gender or a sex, which used to be the same thing, which is still the same thing if you've got two brain cells to rub together and aren't infected by the woke mind virus. Literal man fading away into obscurity, into the annals of history. Yeah, you heard me. Found on ScienceAlert.com, headline, "The Y chromosome is vanishing. A new sex gene may be the future of men." I see this headline and I'm all like, bro. And then I'm thinking, well, I don't know, maybe bro is the wrong word, or maybe it will soon be the wrong word. I don't know. So this article is from February 2024, and it's also from December of 2022. When I hit the old Google to re-find this article, both of those popped up as results, so I pulled them both up. They are literally 14 months apart. They use the same headline, the same picture, and out of the 918 words in the articles, there are 4 words different, with the 2024 article having an additional line at the very bottom stating, quote, "An earlier version of this article was published in December 2022. I mean, yes, technically it was an earlier article chronologically, but that to me almost makes it sound like this current one is like an update, which it's not. Like at all. It's the exact same article. And I guess men are still just fading away. Great. So what exactly is going on here? Okay, well, here's the problem. First of all, the so-called science website has the audacity to claim that the Y chromosome actually determines if a mammal baby is going to be male or female. Now, I don't know if they just haven't kept up with the latest woke scientific knowledge, or if they just don't care about the science of feelings, but this just seems very transphobic to me. Regardless, let's try to suppress our rage. We can go scream at the sky later. Let's walk down their phobic path and see what they bigotedly have to say. Now, they say that the Y chromosome is degenerating, and it appears that it'll possibly disappear in only a few million years, quote, leading to our extinction, unless we evolve a new sex gene. Now, before you panic and start stocking up on survival supplies like batteries and food buckets or water filter straws, or start digging that fallout shelter or whatever you do for a potential extinction event, there is possibly hope. We just need to evolve into rats. I think that's what they're saying. See, the spiny rat, which I'll be honest, except for the tail, that looks kind of like a small snake, which will likely give me some sort of night terrors for the foreseeable future, they're actually cute little fellas. Not fellas, maybe not. I don't know. No Y chromosome, you see. Well, 2 different branches of the spiny rat have already lost their Y chromosomes, and they're still kicking. And how, you may ask? Well, they refer to a paper published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, which is, in full disclosure here, my favorite of the proceedings, entitled Turnover of Mammal Sex Chromosomes in the SRY-Deficient Amemi Spiny Rat is Due to Male-Specific Upregulation of SOX9. Yeah, I know. Just like that earworm of a song lyric, you won't be able to get that title out of your head for days. Now, I read the abstract of the paper, the summary, and let me assure you, it was just as compelling and riveting as the title would suggest, and I totally recognized many of the words used within said abstract as being those commonly used in my native tongue of English. Now I know, as a mechanical engineer, we're kind of thought as, being the jack of all trades of the engineering world. The other engineers, the jealous ones, they don't like to admit it, but we really are. We do a little bit of everything and are clearly the premier flavor of engineer. And yes, I'm well aware that I just offended a number of people, possibly including my nephews. That said, one thing we are not is our geneticists. I literally have no idea what this abstract was saying, except that it sounds like the Y chromosome and the associated SRY gene are gone from these few rat species, but apparently a different gene has stepped up, and it's, as they said, quote, defining a novel Y chromosome in the spiny rat. So to quote the documentary Jurassic Park, life finds a way. Now, to these scientists, this is evolution. The problem is losing the Y chromosome and SRY gene. Well, that's a loss, as the term losing implies. It's a loss of information, not a gain of information. So by definition, it's not truly evolution. What this looks like to me, and I call me crazy here, is that God designed, at least for these rats and maybe all mammals, because who knows, designed them with a backup system to define sex. Despite the fact that men these days can apparently become pregnant and women can have testicular cancer, it still seems as if, except for a few very unique cases, a male and a female are required to make a baby. And although a number of species have gone extinct for a number of reasons, it looks to me like God threw in a backup system to ensure reproduction could continue. Back to the article. They state that females have two X chromosomes, quote, and males have a single X and a puny little chromosome called Y. Now, they may be just being a little snarky here, or they may be belittling males. Kind of hard to tell these days, to be honest. Regardless, the X apparently contains about 900 genes and does all sorts of things, and the Y contains about 55 genes, quote, and a lot of non-coding DNA, simple, repetitive DNA that doesn't seem to do anything. Now, if you recall my podcast last week, you'll remember that it drives me crazy that so-called science just dismisses things that they haven't identified a specific function for. Just because they don't know what it doesn't mean it doesn't do anything. God isn't a God of waste. I have a hard time believing that there's just some tangled balls of random DNA in the Y chromosome because, God was like, oh man, I've got all this stuff left over. I guess I'll just shove it in here. I'm fairly positive that this DNA does something, and if the Lord tarries and we haven't advanced our technology and medical science all the way back to the Stone Age, we'll eventually figure out what it does, and it'll be important, and it'll be amazing. Anyway, about 12 weeks after conception, the SRY gene, which stands for the sex region on the Y gene, switches on other genes that regulate the development of the testes, which makes testosterone, etc., developing a boy as a boy. And whenever I hear the word testes, I remember from my teen years, I think it was from a movie, the saying, testes, 1, 2, 3? And then I chuckle. Anyway, apparently this SRY gene is what triggers the SOX9 gene, which is the key for male determination in all vertebrates. So back to the abstract, basically kind of trying to piece this all together, it appears that the two branches of spiny rats have a duplicated SOX9 gene that actually takes the place of and does the job of triggering itself to start the male development. Like I said, a backup system. All right, so why is it being assumed that the Y chromosome is disappearing? Well, we have to go to the magical world of evolution for that answer. Come, walk with me, will you? As stated, the X has 900 genes. The Y has only 55 genes. This is very lopsided. I think you'll agree. In the platypus, now hang with me here, this ties together seamlessly in a moment. In the platypus, we find that the X and Y chromosomes have an equal number of genes. Knowing that the platypus branched off from the rest of the mammals about 166 million years ago, the platypus quickly arriving at its current form, whatever that is, evolving no further, and mammals continuing on evolving and evolving, eventually humans branching off as their own species. That means that in however many millions of years, we've lost 845 genes in the Y chromosome. Doing some simple math, they arrive at a loss of 5 genes for every million years, and with only 55 genes left, doing even more basic math tells us that in a mere 11 million years, the Y chromosome is gone. That's the average answer. But really, science has estimated the Y chromosome will either hang on infinitely or it may disappear in a few thousand years. I mean, who's to say, right? So scientifically, this is a steady state theory of evolution, that all things have always happened the same as they're happening now. That's why they can do some very simple math and arrive at the conclusion that the Y chromosome is, poof, disappearing. Now, from a biblical worldview, this is called ridiculous. This is the same kind of, and let's call it what it is, reckless, careless kind of science that says that evolution is determined by the number of chromosomes an organism has. So, humans have 46 chromosomes, the same as an olive. If we get to 58, evolve all the way up to 58, we could be a woolly mammoth. 60 would make us cattle or a goat. And in millions or billions of years, maybe we can hit the ultimate evolutionary form of the adder's tongue, a fern with 1,260 chromosomes. Evolution is a wonderful, silly thing, isn't it? See, the problem with evolution is that it's all assumptions. It's based on fantasy. When you start with the wrong assumption and continue building onto that incorrect base with more bad assumptions, what do you got? So to the evolutionary scientist, well, this is fact. This is reasonable. This is something to be concerned about. The loss of the Y chromosome millions of years in the future. To the woke mob, this is just normal. Of course evolution would go that way. Eventually, organisms will catch up to what they know to be true. Sex and gender are just social constructs. To the Christian, this is just how humans were created, an X with 900 genes and a Y with 55. To the Christian scientist, or even the Christian just layperson in general, we should look at these rats with great inquisitiveness, if that's a word. We should look at humans, and inquire if God created the same backup mechanism in humans. Most males, shockingly, aren't tested for the Y chromosome. Most mammals aren't tested for the Y chromosome. It is possible that the SRY gene is the primary and the SOX9 is a backup. But is it possible that the SRY is the more common, but the SOX9 is more common than we know? This is simply the handiwork of God, and we should treat it and strive to learn about it as such. That would be real science. Now again, don't get me wrong. What this study has done is real science, just based off of wrong assumptions, therefore arriving at wrong conclusions. The actual science of the SRY and SOX9 genes that they did is real. Everything else around it is nothing but fantasy based on the unprovable, irrational religion of evolution. In fact, the Y chromosome is actually pretty fascinating. A Danish study, and man, I could really use some cream cheese Danish right about now. But that's not what we're talking about. Focus here, people. A study from the magical land of Denmark in 2017 found that the Y chromosome is unique in many ways that actually increases its robustness. They started studying it for the same reason, concerned it was disappearing, which was compounded by the knowledge that since this little fella is all alone, it can't use something called genetic recombination with other similar genes to repair itself from generation to generation, like happens when two people create another people. This gene is only passed from father to son, so since a man and a man can't create a baby, again, despite what we're trying to be forced to believe these days, whatever the dad has is whatever the son gets. That's it. That in itself is amazing, because as a Christian who believes the Bible correctly, meaning a young earth view, that means this Y chromosome is the same one that Adam had, for all intents and purposes, and for 6,000 years, this thing has passed father to son, apparently without any glitches or mutations that would cause it to fail. Now, for the evolutionist, it's even more amazing. Even if you say that we were the same as apes to the point that we split 6 million years ago, the fact that this little guy has hung on for 6 million years, that's pretty impressive. So, the Y chromosome actually does some sort of its own rearrangement and gene amplification, they call it, to ensure it's functioning and it's passed on correctly. They also found that it has DNA sequences that can be read the same backward and forward, which protects it from degrading since it doesn't have to pass along perfectly, and it allows it to enact a sort of copy and paste process to repair damaged genes with undamaged backup copies since they're more able to fit in perfectly. The study says that this process developed. I'd say that it was designed. They also say that it appears that these same processes are found in mammals across the board. What are the odds of that? Now, they'll say evolution. I'll say common designer. So, like I said, you don't have to panic. Man isn't or men aren't going anywhere. Well, maybe I should say that the Y chromosome, the SRY gene, and or the SOX9 gene aren't going anywhere. Male children will continue to be created. Men, however, well, we're quite literally at the bottom of the intersectionality pile. In fact, I saw that apparently in January of this year, the DEI chief, that's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion chief for Johns Hopkins Hospital, well, the former DEI chief, now Dr. Sharita Golden, a middle-aged, looks like maybe upper middle-aged black woman, sent out an email with the diversity word of the month. And that month, the month of January, the word was, ding, 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 privilege. The definition, you ask? Oh, well, I have that. Quote, privilege is a set of benefits given to people who are in a specific social group. Privilege operates on personal, interpersonal, cultural, and institutional levels, and it provides advantages and favors to members of dominant groups at the expense of members of other groups. In the United States, privilege is granted to people who have membership in one or more of these social identity groups. Everybody grab your pencils. White people, able-bodied people, heterosexuals, cisgender people, males, Christians, middle or owning class people, middle-aged people, English-speaking people. Now, I'll be honest, this sounds great. I am the most privileged person on the face of the planet, and you shall all bow to my privilegedness. And looking around myself, I'm all like, yeah, this is how the privileged live. Anyway, the war against males is on like Donkey Kong, and even more so, the war against Christian males is in full force. And if the goal is to destroy males and manhood, well, they'll have to go through Christians. And even that isn't exactly correct, as not all who profess to be Christian are Christian. So really, the battle to save manhood falls on a small subset of men who not only claim to be, but actually are Christians. No other religion can fight this battle, as they either have systems of moral relativism, meaning they're not willing to do battle, or they are literally toxic in their style of manhood. Think Islam, for instance, where their version of manhood is not what manhood is supposed to be. So found on notthebee.com, headline, America's War Against Christian Manhood, and our call to fight back. Now, the author of this article has us imagine a little boy named Joe. They then pose the question, quote, let us imagine that we wish to crush masculinity and Christianity out of a young boy named Joe. What sort of society would we create to accomplish this most effectively? I mean, could you even imagine 10 years ago or 20 years ago asking that question? And more importantly, asking the question seriously. But here we are. They then go on to outline, reminiscent of the style of Paul Harvey's If I Was the Devil broadcast from 1965, how, if they wanted to destroy Christianity and Christian males, how would they do that? First, we would insist that boys act like girls from as early in life as we possibly could, including punishing them for acting like boys, roughhousing, being aggressive, being a little wild. We would take young boys away from their parents for large parts of their day as early as possible and place them in institutions that would enforce the rules that boys act more like girls. Just sit still and be quiet. Then parents would be told that when their little boy doesn't act like a little girl, there's something wrong, and drugs are the answer. Along with drugs, sedentary entertainment would be administered in order to keep them still, quiet, and isolated. And through that entertainment, they would learn that boys and men are clumsy and stupid, they're troublemakers, and girls and women are the heroes of society, the type of people all boys and girls should strive to emulate. In fact, as I type this manuscript, I'm seeing a commercial in the background from Smart Asset where the dad decided to dig and concrete a backyard pool or pond by himself, and well, now he's stuck knee-deep in dried concrete. His long, curly-haired young son looks on as the dad looks up and says, "It dries so fast." The boy turns and shouts for Mom. Well, the next scene, apparently he's been left out there as the dumb husband he is. It's now nighttime and thunder rumbles in the background. Funny? Kind of. Agenda-driven? Oh, you bet. Boys, if they have a father in the home, would see him as little as possible. And through only a few generations of societal conditioning, men will be disrespected, disregarded, and belittled in their own home in front of their boys, which would create a death spiral of men not wanting to be at home in that environment, so they leave, or they stay away longer. As the final nail in the coffin of manhood, and specifically Christian manhood, churches would be emasculated. They would ask nothing of boys. They would hand over teaching of boys from cradle through college to, admittedly in most cases, well-meaning women. Disregarding the Bible they claim to believe, they turn leadership of the church over to women, including an increasing amount of women pastors who aren't pastors at all, for my Bible tells me so. They're just unrepentant, rebellious sinners flying the tall finger right in God's face. Harsh? Maybe. True? Absolutely. Again, boys will be chastised for being boys, expected to act more like girls, even in church. The gospel message will be softened. The Bible's reliability will be questioned. Yes, inside the church. The kids will be told to go ask their teachers at school about certain things because that's science, not religion. And Jesus would be feminized, making his sole message one of starry-eyed love and non-judgmentalism and sympathetic softness. And this is what's happened over the last number of generations, and it's happening today still. Now, full disclosure, not all of that was in the article. I used them as a base and went off on my own tangents. You can click the link to the article in the notes below, and you can read that for yourself if you so choose. When I lived in Alabama, I was somewhat surprised by the lack of men in church. In the South, you're a Christian because you live in the Bible Belt. My impression, and yours may vary, was that generally men weren't expected to go to church. I mean, they had football or college sports or hunting or fishing or something going on Sunday mornings. So the women went to church, dragging the kids behind them, and the men stayed home or in the woods or in the boat. And honestly, when I started looking at it a handful of years ago, I grew up in a church that was heavily run by women. The men held the leadership positions, but we all knew that at least a number of them were nothing but mouthpieces. As I moved into a position of leadership in West Virginia now, I found a church that had a number of men who were either uneducated with regard to their faith or lacking the confidence to step up and teach. As leader of the children's ministry, I pushed to get some men to teach Sunday school, and I was somewhat successful. Men teaching with predefined materials is a start. Sadly, not many men were capable of filling the pulpit if needed. Some were, but some were simply interested in spending half of their time talking about how stupid they are, or how we've obviously reached the bottom of the barrel for them to be up there, or some other sort of self-deprecation that I just absolutely hate. And then the second half of their time, they prove that they were correct. Again, harsh? Yeah, kind of. But sometimes the truth hurts. The first service I attended at my current church, I heard the deeper tones of men singing across the sanctuary, not just from those on the stage leading the singing, and it honestly made my eyes well up. Men, Christian men, involved, engaged. Men, you don't know what you're missing until you find yourself in the midst of it. Men and women are different, not just genetically or biologically, but spiritually as well. Men have a role in the church, in the family, and in society. Women have a role in the church, in the family, and in society. And you have no idea how hard it is for me to not make a joke about in the kitchen, but that wouldn't be appropriate at the serious point that we're currently at, so I shan't be doing that. The biblical model is one of complementarianism, where men and women work together toward a common goal. It is not one of egalitarianism, where men and women are equal and interchangeable. They aren't. If you don't like that, talk to God. And if you disagree with that, you need to talk to God. There's a lot of evidence, and more every day coming out, that the feminist movement was one of the worst things to happen to this country and the planet. I'm not saying, despite my joking, that women should be barefoot and pregnant, kid on each hip, scrambling to make dinner and get my slippers and pipe and rub my shoulders and get that house clean. That sort of system is not biblical either. But without going into it here, as it's a massive rabbit trail, the goals of the feminist movement were not equality. They were superiority. It was a replacement movement. And the damage that's done to society is becoming more and more clear. So what do? Well, as men and women, we need to know what the Bible says and do it and model it for our kids and for kids in general. We need to remove people from positions of influence and power over our kids as much as possible who would undermine what the Bible says about manhood and womanhood. And that means all the way to the top, the president, the Congress, the governors, the mayors, school board members, teachers, get into the church. We need to remove people from positions that they shouldn't be in. We need to get men involved. And it starts with knowing what it means to be a man, per the Bible. As again, there's literally no other system that gets this right, religious or otherwise. I was going to say religious or man-made, but quite literally, all religious systems not based on the Bible are man-made. So I said it differently. GotQuestions.org has an article regarding what the Bible says about being a man. So to wrap this up, let's take a look at what they say a biblical man is and does. They start with what the world says about being a man, about being masculine. Quote, "The world offers conflicting views of what being a man is all about. Some say that being a man requires grit, square-jawed determination, a working knowledge of weaponry, and preferably rock-solid abs. Others say that manliness is about getting in touch with one's feelings and caring for the less fortunate and being sensitive. Still others would include leadership skills, a good work ethic, physical stature, riches, or sexual prowess. Can these things truly define masculinity, or is there another standard?" Well, they maintain that there is another standard, and they put this standard squarely on the shoulders of one single example, Jesus. They make the claim that he is, quote, "the epitome of manhood, the perfect example of what true maturity looks like." Shockingly, they don't immediately point to him whipping people and turning over tables, which is so often, and I'm guilty of this myself, so often what we, men, turn to because Jesus has been so feminized and softened in this current world that we feel we need to jump up straight to the excuse level saying, yeah, but did you know he did this? It's the same problem with all the message of the Bible in general. It's been so compromised and inaccurately summed up as all love just all the time that some people tend to get a little nauseated at that constant screed and feel they need to point out that it's also about sin and wrath and justice and repentance, etc., etc. Some people tend to do that. In both cases, both Jesus and the Bible are both of the things, but if you looked at the messaging today, you'd be hard-pressed to see that in most cases. Anyway, here's what Got Questions lists as characteristics of Jesus as to why he's the epitome of manhood and masculinity. First, he was full of the Holy Spirit. Next, he lived in complete dependence and obedience to the will of God. Next, he fully displayed the fruit of the Spirit. He was about his Father's business. He shunned sin and followed after righteousness. He sought to keep God's law and live in God's will. He was willing to accomplish God's will no matter the cost. He endured opposition without losing heart. He was a man of the Word, using Scripture to overcome temptation. He was a man of prayer. He was a man of love and sacrifice. And I can say as a man, honestly, I'd like to revisit that rock-solid abs thing because I feel like I might have a better shot at that. And let's be honest, that ain't happening. This list is admittedly daunting. But although Jesus was the perfect man in all points, and yes, he did have a righteous anger when it came to blasphemy and dishonoring his father, etc., and although Jesus was very likely ripped, for lack of a better term, a rugged, strong, calloused-handed individual, just from his growing up as the son of a carpenter, these are not the traits that Got Question chose to focus on. Strength, physical, mental, spiritual, well, that is all part of being a man. The willingness to sacrifice, to protect, well, that's part of it. The willingness to lead and the desire to learn and study, grow, correct mistakes, apologize, and ask for forgiveness, then try again. All of that's part of it. But a true man will be one who desires and strives to be like Christ, the perfect God, and the perfect man. So men, how are we doing in this? Yeah, me too. Wives, how are you doing supporting this? He can use it. We'll never get it perfect. There's no question there. But guys, it's time to step up and be men. In the home, in the workplace, in the church. I'm not at all afraid of the Y chromosome disappearing. I've got a God who takes care of that. I'm worried about two things: the attack on manhood in the general population and the lack of men in the church in general. And if we lose that second one, the first one dies with it. So men, like the Petra song from 1987 says, get on your knees and fight like a man. All right, we've wound our way back around to Danny's book review installment 2 this time. And yes, I'm still kicking myself for not having enough foresight to use the term chapter with the book reviews, but this is my life now. Okay, no reason to beat around the bush or mill about the library or whatever. Let's just go ahead and get to it. Now, since the last installment, which was coincidentally the first installment, I've completed 3 more books this year. The reading during my lunch break at work and a little bit every now and then at night before I drift off to CP is working pretty well for now. Sure, I'll probably get bored with the routine eventually, but, we're already nearing midway through month number 3, so you never know. Okay. First book on the docket is entitled, Why Is That in the Bible? The subtitle or byline or whatever it is, quote, The Most Perplexing Verses and Stories and What They Teach Us. This book is by Eric J. Bargerhoff, whose name you may recognize as I reviewed his book, The Most Misused Verses in the Bible. That was in the last installment. You may be sensing a little bit of a pattern in his books. As with the last one, this one is a number of verses or passages that are considered to be odd, right? In fact, there are 40 chapters in this 224-page book, not counting the endnotes section. So really, this is a great book for those with reading ADD, right? Regarding the oddity of the verses or passages in the Bible, they could be things that Christians find confusing in the Bible, or they could be things that actually kind of help to show that the Bible is authentic history, not just some story that was made up, because you would never include some of what's in the Bible if you were writing a fiction, a hero-based, believe my made-up religion type of story. Now, the Bible is true and honest and forthcoming and real, which lends to its credibility. So what are some of these chapters, you may ask? Well, I'm going to tell you. We have things like hating your family, Balaam and the talking donkey, men emasculating themselves, Jeremiah's linen underwear, Solomon's many wives, Absalom's head stuck in a tree, handling snakes and drinking poison, dismemberment of the concubine, sweating drops of blood, and child sacrifice, among many others. So the question is, to the best of my knowledge, does he present an accurate interpretation of these various accounts? And not being a Greek or Hebrew scholar, I would say, from what I've read, from other teaching by teachers and pastors that I trust, I'd have to say yeah. And now there are maybe a few things in there that I've heard differing interpretations, but by and large, I think that what Bargerhoff has presented is accurate. I think it's well researched, it's definitely well written, and it's summarized, packaged, and presented in these bite-sized chunks, getting the info out there without getting bogged down in the minutia of details that aren't really necessary for a book like this. As with his other book, I definitely recommend this one. This is a really good standalone read, and then it's definitely worth having just at hand as a quick reference on these topics. Okay, book number 2 for the installment is entitled The Ever-Loving Truth by Voddie Baucham Jr. The subtitle, or whatever, on the cover of the book asks, quote, Can faith thrive in a post-Christian culture? Now, this was a book that was originally written in, I believe, 2004, best I can tell from the copyrights. And unless you've been in a coma, there have been a couple somewhat significant changes to our world and country in the last couple decades. So this edition is stated as being, quote, fully revised and updated as of 2023. Okay, so this book is divided into 3 sections. But to be honest, I'm not entirely sure why. The sections are given headers, but again, I'm not sure that they should be. Section 1 is entitled Pre-Christian Attitudes in a Post-Christian Culture. Section 2 is entitled Drawing a Line in the Sand. And Section 3 is entitled What Shall We Say? And those are fine. But honestly, about halfway through the book, it kind of dawned on me that this was sort of a book of random topics. I don't really see how they go with the section titles. I don't know. There are 10 chapters plus a conclusion, 214 pages, not counting the endnotes, and each chapter is kind of its own unique subject. Now, the overall premise is truth, specifically biblical truth, and each chapter does use that as its central theme. I almost viewed it as kind of a Christian primer of sorts. Now, some of it was kind of more basic, why should we believe this is true? Other parts were more focused on proclaiming the truth. And look, I'm a Vody fan. I really enjoy his preaching, his teaching, and I value his worldview, especially with his latest focus on Christianity and racism and social justice, things like that. He's got a very unique and very applicable perspective on these topics, and he's got a great grasp on theology. We don't agree 100% on everything, but excellent. Okay, and he's got a fantastic voice. It doesn't matter for the book, but if you've ever been to the Creation Museum in Kentucky and watched the In 6 Days video presentation, which is just a top-notch CGI animation of Genesis 1, right? Vody is the voiceover reading Genesis 1 as the events take place on the screen. Now, I've read a number of Vody's books, and I've got a few more on the shelf that I haven't gotten to yet. Out of the books I've read, I would say that for me, this one probably held my attention maybe the least, I guess. I find that my mind drifts when I'm reading anyway. It's just one of those things with me. Now, I know I'm not alone in this, but it was kind of all over the place trying to read this book. My mind, kind of just all over the place. It's just drifting in and out. Now, it may be because I've heard or read, I think, all of these topics more than once before, most of them multiple times before, either from Vody or from others, so it kind of felt like more of a refresher, maybe. It may be because I just couldn't seem to latch on to what I would consider to be a logical progression of topics or chapters, so it kind of lost me time and again throughout the book. That said, the information presented was spot on. I mean, the idea that we do not have the option to be neutral, that we are to go and tell, that the Bible is reliable, and so on, those are massively important to understand, and I think he presents them correctly. As for being fully revised and updated, well, I don't have the original book, so I don't really know how many changes were made. But with the topics presented, I mean, truth is truth, right? It's unchanging, so every once in a while, there would be something in there that referenced something happening in the first few years of the 2020s. But even that felt like it was kind of shoehorned in there, like it didn't really flow well. So, okay, would I recommend this book? Well, it's a good book with good information, and it's got a good perspective because Vody has a good perspective. I would not recommend it as highly as his other books or as other books in general. So if you were only wanting to or only able to purchase one book, this would not be my first recommendation. Okay, last book for today. This one is entitled The Most Misused Stories in the Bible, written by, yes, say it with me, Eric J. Bargerhoff. See, what happened is that I stumbled upon this guy with these three the most whatever books right around Christmas, and I asked for them for Christmas, and I got 2 of them for Christmas, and I just went ahead and bought the 3rd one myself, and so, yeah, I mean, these kind of themes capture my attention. It's probably the root cause analysis mindset I have. This is the last one by Mr. Bargerhoff for me, I promise. In fact, per Amazon, it appears that he only has one more book from 2010. It's about church discipline. I totally agree with church discipline, although until the current church that I'm in, I've never been in one that has the intestinal fortitude to follow the very clear teaching and command in the Bible to enact church discipline, but I don't have any interest in that topic for right now, so I'm not going to get that book. Okay, so this book is exactly how it sounds. Rather than verses or small passages, this book is more about some of the larger accounts that people, specifically, I'd say pastors and teachers, who probably shouldn't be pastors or teachers, they like to misuse it for their own purposes. This is a 160-page book, not counting the notes, with 14 chapters plus an intro and a conclusion. So these chapters are a bit longer than his previous books, but still more than manageable if you've got that reading ADD going for you. And again, his research, his style makes these very readable. Have you ever heard a message about how that problem you're facing in your life is your Goliath? Yeah, that's a misuse of the biblical account. Has anyone told you when you're faced with a difficult choice to lay out a fleece? That's not how things work. The health wealth preachers will tell you to sow a seed. Just sow a seed of $1,000 to show Jesus you're serious about your faith. Something like that. Side note, if your pastor or church ever implies that you should sow a seed, you're very possibly in a health wealth church. Investigate further, and if you are, get out. Find a biblical church. How about blasphemy of the Holy Spirit? How many definitions have you heard about what that might be? It's really not that complicated, and frankly, it's amazing how many people try to make it into something that it's just not. So, as with his other books, am I in complete agreement with him on everything? No, not complete, but we're really close. Again, as with his other books, this is an excellent book. It's very informative, very well written. I definitely recommend it as a great book to read through and then keep it on hand as a reference. Now, over the last 6 years or so, the period of which I'd considered myself to have taken a step change up in my theology and biblical knowledge, etc., these are the kinds of things that, they really kind of blew my mind early on. We, and I'm kind of generalizing modern day evangelicalism as a whole into this, we have been taught things certain ways by probably for most of us well-meaning people who are trying to relay what they were taught or what they found on the subject. And the amount of poor teaching, poor theology, lack of knowledge is simply astounding. And now that I've moved into this new church, I feel like I've gone from being a big fish, a theologian, to a small fish in a vast ocean, like I'm back in my elementary days. That's both an uncomfortable feeling for me and exactly what I craved, knowing that there is so much more than what is generally presented on any given Sunday. I wanted to be challenged. Books like what Eric Bargerhoff wrote are the kinds of books that spark that drive to learn. If I've always understood this thing wrong, what else am I not understanding rightly? I think this is why when we get to Matthew 7 and Jesus' warning that not everyone who says to him, Lord, Lord, in your name did we not, and then fill in the blank, I think this is why so many will be shocked that they're not in fact saved, but are culpable, as they never cracked open their Bible to even make an attempt at understanding or verifying that what they were being taught aligned with the Bible. Especially today, we have more access to more Bibles and an almost infinite number of resources, and the population at large goes in on a Sunday morning, blesses God with their very presence, ensures their butt groove is still intact in the seat or pew cushion, and then leaves and never opens their Bible or Bible app. Although it wasn't these 3 books, it was these kinds of small revelations on my part that, not all I've been taught, not all I thought to be true was actually correct. It was told to me, and I never looked into it. I just accepted it at face value, and then I repeated it so I could infect other people, I guess. Okay. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get off my high horse here, step down onto my soapbox, and then I'll step back down onto the rabbit trail, and we'll walk back to the main point. So, those are Danny's book reviews for installment number 2. This incidentally wraps up all of the books that I received for Christmas gifts. I like to go and throw those up at the front of the list and get those read. If someone thinks enough to buy me a book, then I think I should think enough of that person to read the book. Next time, I should have another 2, maybe 3 books to review, the way things are looking right now, but we'll see how it goes. These are longer and physically larger, and I'm heading into a couple books that I've been putting off for a while now as they're political in nature, and I just couldn't. Even though I feel that I need to, I'll explain that next time. I've put the Amazon links in the notes as always, but that doesn't mean you have to buy from Amazon. It's just the easiest place to link to, and that'll do it for now. So, now, go read something. And with that, sadly, we've reached the end of yet another episode of the Logical Christian Podcast. I feel we've bonded as we've laughed and cried and twisted our faces in incredulity. If you've enjoyed or found value in what you've heard, go on and do all the podcast things. And don't forget to check the show notes for links and contact info. Lawrence J. Peters said, "Against logic there is no armor like ignorance." Jesus told us that if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So stay in the word, stay logical, stay faithful, and until next time, God bless.